For those of you listening who are professional brewers, I'm here to tell you that planning brew schedules just got easier. Starting now, Imperial Yeast guarantees that commercial orders up to 20 liters of 3 of their most popular strains will ship free if they're not in stock when you place your order. So in addition to pitching right with the highest quality yeast on the market, they're promising that yeast will be ready when you need it or shipping is on them. A rad deal from a rad company. Whether you're a pro or a home brewer, if you haven't tried Imperial Yeast in your brewery yet, it's time to up your game. You can check out everything Imperial Yeast has to offer and place your commercial orders at imperialyeast.com. Of all the various processes involved in making beer, one that seems to get the most attention, at least to me, is the mash. Water to grist ratios, precise and stable temperature, so many intricate things that are all purported to have an impact on beer. Now, for the more advanced brewers or those who just happen to have a penchant for chemistry, ensuring the mash is within the proper pH range is important as well, and there are numerous ways to achieve this. You're listening to the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schutt, and in this episode, I'm joined by contributor Cade Jobe to discuss mash pH adjustment, particularly as it regards using acids.
All right, you ready to get your chemistry on, y'all?
I'm not a big chemistry guy, I got to be honest. This is probably going to be one of those shows where I learn more than I'm willing to, or that I'm capable of teaching. So,
yeah, no, totally, me too. I say that mostly jokingly. We'll see where we get. Well, I'm not going to get too much into the weeds on this one, mostly because I don't know what I'm talking about either. But we can get there. You know, we could talk about acid for a while.
Yeah, it's practical application, and that's what matters.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. So
exactly.
And by acid, we're not talking about the things that come on tabs of paper that used to be doled out at Grateful Dead concerts. So full disclosure, we've got a few experiments looking at the impact of mash pH overall, and while that's not what this episode is about, those experiments at the very least, I'm going to admit that it's not something that I worry about too much these days. That said, there's some evidence out there suggesting that maintaining a proper mash pH can have some benefits, and so for that I look forward to digging into this topic. All right, if you're a regular listener of this show and you would like to make sure that you get to keep hearing it, there are a few things you can do to help. First off, you can become a patron of Brewlosophy by visiting patreon.com/Brewlosophy. By making a small monthly pledge, you'll receive some neat rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invite to a monthly live Q&A session with someone in the brewing world. Coming up later this month is Caleb Schwecke, who you may know from the Late Edition podcast by Yakima Valley Hops. He's going to be taking patron questions. Caleb's an awesome dude who knows a ton about hops. You don't want to miss this one. Past guests have included folks like Stan Hieronymus, Vinny Chilurzo, and John Kimmich, to name a few. And all past sessions are available on our private Facebook page, so you can go back and check those out whenever you like. Learn more about becoming a patron over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy. And if you wouldn't mind letting us know what you think about this show by rating and reviewing it in the Apple Podcasts or wherever it is you listen to podcasts, we would really appreciate it. I just happened to notice all of the incredible reviews over at Stitcher. So thanks for all the kind words to people who've been leaving those reviews. That's very motivating. All right, feedback this week is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who offer brewers a bunch of rad stainless equipment like the turnkey BH15 Pilot brewing system, which has a hard plumb manifold to eliminate all hosing changes during the brew process. Brewers Hardware also has a ton of unique purpose-built products useful to both professionals and homebrewers. Go see for yourself at brewershardware.com, and don't forget to mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. That's brewershardware.com. All right, Nick Payne wrote in with a question on water chemistry. Go figure. He says, hey, you guys rock. You've taught me heaps about brewing. Well, thank you, Nick. That's much appreciated. And I love the technical approach to assessing if something has actually made a detectable difference to the beer. I've been looking into water recently, and I'm puzzled about something. Are ppm ion values supposed to be for the final in the fermenter volume of water or total volume of water, i.e. Volume of mash water plus sparge water? He says he's a brew in a bag brewer, uses distilled water, adds salts to achieve his desired ion ppm values in the mash, but when I remove the soaked grains and boil for an hour, it would concentrate the ions in the final wort substantially. So he's asking, are ions lost in absorption during the mash and evaporation during the boil? Is the commonly quoted 50 ppm minimum of calcium the concentration needed in the mash, or the final wort that goes into the fermenter?
I can tell you mostly what I do in my process. So whenever I'm managing that, looking to hit a target mineral profile, I'm looking at the amount of minerals added in the mash, which means the total volume of water that I'm starting with, to adjust that water as it goes into the mash. Regarding whether it changes whenever you get into a boil or the total ions are somehow concentrated or more condensed, I really wouldn't know the chemistry of that. I can just say what I do in my process, and for sure, whenever I'm looking at a target profile, I'm looking at matching that initial volume of water that goes into the mash to get to the target profile.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the typical way people are viewing it. You know, there is an approach where people add, you know, a teaspoon of gypsum to the boiling wort, something like that. The concept though is water profile, not beer or wort profile. And yeah, you are adjusting the chemistry of the water so that it impacts the ultimate perceptibility, the flavor of the beer and whatnot. But it is the water profile that you're adjusting ahead of time. So once you get that, and I do the same thing you do, Cade, where I collect my entire volume, I adjust that, and then if I'm going to split up that water into a mash and sparge volumes, it's all the same. I don't do any more adjustments from there on out. So hopefully that clears some things up for you, Nick. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brulosophy.com. Leave us a voice message by calling 951-444-0320 or drop us a note on social media. Okay, so I really enjoy both coffee and stout, but I have not been much of a fan of the whole coffee stout thing, at least the ones that I've tried. I'll drink them. They're okay. Well, listener Chris Shank from Scottsbluff, Nebraska, aimed to change my mind with an Imperial Coffee Stout he brewed and sent me, about which he says, "This Imperial Coffee Stout is the largest beer I have ever brewed." Which isn't really saying much, as I've only been brewing for about 2 years, with about 1.5 years of that being all grain. It was brewed with coffee, nutmeg, and cinnamon in the boil kettle. In the end, this beer came out at about 8.9% ABV, which is nothing to scoff at, and the grains went on to make another smaller beer that turned about like a brown ale, he says. I'm happy with the results. As of writing this, the beer has been bottled for about 3 months. I plan to age it until next winter, but until then, I'll pull a bottle out once in a while and see how it's coming. Thanks in advance for what I'm sure will be an awesome and hilarious review. Well, we'll just have to see about that.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
Look at this. Look at it. Look at it.
Damn,
Look at
that's
this. Look at this.
That's some cocoa right there.
Totally know it's not a Coors Light. I'm smelling the microphone. Hang on. Chocolate.
So definitely chocolate.
Yeah, chocolate. Chocolate.
Cocoa.
Totally know it's not a Coors Light. Yeah, it's got some cacao in
It's
there.
good. It's very good.
It's probably brewed with remember that guy that brewed with chocolate cereal? That's
Yeah.
probably what it is or something like that.
I like it.
I don't need to drink it then. If you like it, I'm going to like it.
It's good.
Okay then, buddy. I trust your opinion.
I like it.
You also like other stuff.
Stop
that I
it.
don't like. I like horsepower. You like horsepower.
Yeah.
I like this beer. You like this beer.
I do.
I don't not like it.
Definitely cocoa-ish.
Totally know it's not a Coors Light. Nah, let's not even guess this one, dude. We're going to be made
Oh,
look
no.
like fools. No. What we can
Imperial
just,
Stout.
we stick to our wheelhouse. We know some things. Sometimes we don't know things.
I don't know anything. I just know it tastes good.
I don't know much, but I know it'll taste good. And that may be all there is to know.
It's good.
Okay, it's grown on me now to where I like it, but I don't know what it is.
I
It's
have no
dark,
idea.
so the options are limited, right? But he could have just put food coloring in it just to fuck with us. He's a devious
He's
son
like
of a
that,
gun.
you know.
Let's just say that we like it.
I do like it.
I like it
Going
too.
with an 18.
I'm going to go a little lighter now. I'm going to go 7. 18 and 7 for a total of 5 Jersey Tims. 5 Jersey Tims. Totally know it's not a Coors Light.
He may have been joking, but Timmy nailed this one when he, in the beginning of the review, when he called out Imperial Stout. And then I think they both kind of picked up hints of coffee and chocolate and all that stuff. So, hey, good job to Jersey and Tim. Kate, are you a fan of these coffee stout concoctions?
Totally not a Coors Light.
Jersey and his singing.
Yeah, I can't get that out of my head now. I
know.
don't think. I just every time I think of this review, I'm going to think of that song by Jersey.
That song.
Is that now like a catchphrase for them or something? Totally not a Coors Light. Totally not a Coors Light.
That is how that's the first line of when they're evaluating a beer is Coors Light or not. And so this one wasn't, of course, and so it's totally not one. But I thought they did a good
I love
job.
that.
Yeah. So have you had? Do you make coffee beers or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I've done coffee beers a couple of times. I like coffee. I like beer. I generally really enjoy coffee stouts. This one sounded really good. I wish I had a chance to try it myself.
Yeah. I mean, the dude, Chris has been brewing for what he said, 2 years, only a year and a half of all grain. There's no way you would have, there was nothing off about this beer. It was actually really quite delightful. It's not something I'm going to be brewing all the time. I still just prefer simple beery beer, but for all the stuff that he put in it, I have to say that he had a pretty he did not go heavy-handed because there was nothing too crazy about it. Thanks for sending the beer in, Chris. We really appreciated it, and you did a good job brewing it. So if you would like to have your beer or any other fermented beverage reviewed by Jersey and Tim on the show, you can email me, Marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we will get you all set up. Now, real quick, I want to give a shout out to Brooks Conley, who took first place in Category 1 with his American Light Lager in this year's NHC. Brooks happened to bump into a family friend a couple weeks back, just completely randomly mentioned that he was a fan of Brewlosophy. I don't even know how it came up. So anyways, I just wanted to give him a shout out. Congrats, Brooks. That's a great feat to get first place in American Light Lager. So, all right, when we come back, we are going to be talking about acid adjustment for mash pH. So I've been hanging out with brewers and craft beer nerds for a long time now, and while we do occasionally have our differences, one thing it seems we all share is a love of learning and trying new things, as well as saving a couple of bucks. Well, right now, Craft Beer and Brewing is helping fans of Brewlosophy learn more while saving some coin by offering 20% off the price of a subscription to their awesome magazine. Chock full of brewing insights, tips, and recipes from industry experts, Craft Beer and Brewing is seriously great. I read every issue page to page myself. To get 20% off your subscription, all you have to do is sign up at beerandbrewing.com/brewlosophy. Chilling work can be a chore, especially after a long brew day, but not with the Xchillerator Counterflow Chiller, which can chill a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch of wort in 5 minutes or less, leading to a strong cold break and clear wort in the fermenter. Brewlosophy's Matt Del Fiacco uses the Xchillerator Max and absolutely loves it. In addition to improved chilling efficiency, every Xchillerator comes with a 5-year warranty that covers the entire chiller for manufacturer defects. If you're looking to up your chilling game and a CFC is right for you, head over to Xchillerator.com today. Want to brew quality craft beer at home? The Grainfather provides a brewing system with superior design, innovative features, and the latest technology, allowing you to brew professional quality craft beer at home. Mash, sparge, boil, and cool all in one unit, meaning there's less equipment to use, clean, and store. No need for burners or hot plates. Just plug it in and brew great beer. Then get the best out of your fermentation with the Grainfather conical fermenters and glycol chiller. Plus, enhance your brewing experience with the brand new free-to-use Grainfather community app. You can take your brewing tools and your recipes with you everywhere, use brewing calculators on the fly, manage your recipes, and monitor your brew session from anywhere. Use your mobile device to manage your Grainfather brew wirelessly, automate mash schedules, and multitask without removing any of the brewing hands-on fun. Grainfather products can all be found at www.grainfather.com. Plus, as a Brewlosophy podcast listener, get 10% off your order. Just use discount code Brewlosophy19 at checkout. That's BRULosophy19 to receive 10% off your order. So head to shop.grainfather.com now to get this great deal. On the surface, brewing appears to be all about beer, and while I do believe that is the primary goal, many of us do continue making beer because we also enjoy everything that kind of goes into the brewing process, digging our fingers into the nitty-gritty, which for many includes seemingly complicated things like measuring and adjusting mash pH.
Yeah, mash pH is one of those things, if anybody read my bio that came out last week, one of those things that I pointed out that I still actually watch whenever I'm doing brewing, whenever I'm doing my mash. It's the point. What's the point? Well, there's this thing in your water that's called residual alkalinity, which you may or may not have depending on what the hardness of your water is or what minerals exist in your water. But it turns out that some of those chemicals react with the malt in the mash and can create less than ideal conditions for conversion of malt into fermentable sugars. So that's the whole point of what we're doing when we're adding mash pH, or when we're adjusting our pH at the mash. Most people, I think, know that, and most people that are listening to this podcast sort of understand that. But we started sort of talking about what is mash pH, or what is pH just in general.
Right.
pH is a scale that's used to determine how acidic or basic a water-based aqueous solution is. Really what it measures, for those that want to delve a little deeper into it, is the concentration of hydrogen positive or hydrogen plus ions that exist in a certain aqueous solution. So it's on a scale based on a scale from, I think, 0 to 14 or something like that. And right in the middle is 7, which is what water is. Water is neutral, or is considered neutral at 7.0, and then we base or we look at how acidic or basic something is as compared to water in that scale.
Right.
7.0 being neutral, less than 7 acidic, higher than 7 considered to be basic.
Right.
Acidic meaning greater concentration of H positive ions, basic less concentration of H positive, greater concentration of OH negative ions.
Right. And the thing, like ideally, pure water is going to be right there at 7.0 or so. But one of the reasons that a lot of us in brewing have to resort or have to end up resorting to adjusting using acids, and in the rare occasion you use other compounds, but and we'll talk a little bit about that. But it's because the water that we're getting at our houses, usually because of the source of that water, whether it's coming from the ground or if it's coming from a well, is going to have other stuff in it, other mineral compounds and stuff like that. That's going to impact and change that pH a little bit, but just even in its natural state. But then once you mix it with those grains, certain things are going to, and this is where I start to sound really not smart about this stuff, but certain minerals or that residual alkalinity, like you said, is going to be, or I guess the mash is going to affect those levels and that pH differently depending on the original makeup of that water.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all dependent on what minerals exist in the water. That's and the reaction that those minerals have with the water, which results in your pH either being high or low. So, for example, where I'm at, my pH is usually up close to 8, so fairly highly basic. I've got really hard water, more mineral concentration, and it turns out to be a higher pH than normal. So I have to do quite a bit to reduce my residual alkalinity to get from this really high sort of, I say really high, relatively high pH, at least in terms of a brewing scale, at 8 down to somewhere which is useful for brewing. And we can talk a little bit about that range that's useful for brewing, but that's generally the idea. What we're trying to do is get everything into a range where enzymatic reactions can happen, can convert malt starch into fermentable sugars, which yeast can consume to make beer.
Right, and that's the entire goal. There's been a lot of talk about we say residual alkalinity, and if for listeners out there who maybe haven't really been, let's say, motivated to dig into water chemistry, and just a little disclaimer, it sounds a lot scarier than it is. I've found that water chemistry, when messing with it, whether you're doing mash pH or you're mineralizing your water or whatnot, it is one of the most impactful things I think a brewer can do, particularly when they are using a source of water that's consistent, whether that's RO, store-bought RO, or whatever. And it's also, if you can get past all of the crazy words and numbers and whatnot, it's actually really quite simple once you start to apply it. So with that out of the way, though, so you said your starting water pH is typically around 8.0 because it's a pretty hard. So for that new, or the person who's kind of new to water chemistry, if they're looking at a water profile, they email their water district and they get something returned saying what all of the mineral profile is. What's the indication that they've got hard water? And is it because when I hear that, I think bicarbonates.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what I'm looking at too. I mean, there's a couple of different measures for water hardness, but really, what you're looking for in terms of a brewing water profile, you're wanting to look at things like, without going too much into the weeds, calcium, magnesium, sodium, sulfate, chloride. Yeah, chloride being a big one. And then bicarbonate. High bicarbonates generally results in what we would call or consider hard water and a high residual alkalinity when you're combining it with the mash. So, for example, my water generally starts at around 195, 200 parts per million bicarbonate. That's pretty hard.
That is high.
I don't know
yeah.
what. Yeah, and high. Yeah, I don't know what your water is, Marshall, that you're brewing with.
My HCO3, so my bicarbonate level, I think, I don't have it in front of me, but I think it's somewhere in the 12 to 18 ppm range.
Yeah, so quite a bit different.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking almost 10 times as much, or no, more than 10 times, 12 to 8 range. I mean, geez, we're talking about almost 20 times
Yeah.
at that point. Mine's harder than yours, harder, quote unquote. That's the other thing I would say about water chemistry. Everything's all really relative, right? pH scale goes from 0 to 14. And like some examples, just generally, like stomach acid is a pH of, I think it's 2 or 3. And stomach acid is a super, super corrosive acid. It's intended to break down food and break it into little tiny pieces. So when we're talking about a scale of like 7 to 8 or 7 to 6 or 5 or something like that, you're not talking about these just super corrosive sulfuric volcanic acids or anything like that. You're talking about a relatively small range. So whenever Marshall or I say, oh yeah, you've got really hard water, that doesn't necessarily mean your water is came out of a volcano and
Well, it's within the still safe to consume range.
Yeah.
Then relative to that, your water is pretty damn hard.
Yeah, exactly. But it's probably a good time to talk a little bit about what we're looking for in terms of a mash. So the purported importance of doing this whole thing of controlling your mash pH is to get the enzymes that convert starches to fermentable sugars into ideal conditions. So enzymes work best whenever they're in the environment that they like to live in. So, for example, in any aqueous solution, and aqueous just means in water or in some sort of liquid solution, you're looking the things that you can control in terms of the environment that the enzymes are actively working in. There's a bunch of different things, but two big ones are the temperature and pH, right? So when we talk about mashing at 155 F or in that range, we're also talking about controlling pH in a 5.2 or 5.6 pH range. At least that's the traditional ranges.
Yeah, that's what's commonly said. That's kind of the ideal Goldilocks range for the mash. Now, and on that note, I like the way you said it. That these grains, the enzymes that are going to convert that starch into fermentable sugars do have kind of they work best in this ideal range. At least that's what science has shown us. At the same time, that's quote unquote where they want to be. And the mash is an incredible buffer. It really does do pretty good on its own. And so by making adjustments, the way I like to look at it is we're giving it that final little push just to ensure it's right where we want it to be. And a big reason for that, in my opinion, is consistency of process and ultimately product.
Yeah, for me, that's the big thing. That's why I still control mash pH, right? That's why I still look at it is I want to make sure that I'm doing consistent things each time I brew so that I know that the beer that turns out, at least hopefully comes out the way that I intended it to.
Right.
Controlling my process by monitoring pH to make sure I've done the things up to that point that will give me the expected output in terms of wort content, how the sugar levels, volume, all those things that we're looking for downstream.
Absolutely. Well, let's spend a minute just talking, a little bit about what we might expect if, say, the mash pH is too high versus too low. One of I've heard people talk about, a mash pH in some way impacting perceptibility, having some sort of a noticeable, perceptible impact on the finished beer. With the exception of maybe adding way too much acid and creating what is ultimately a sour beer. I don't see how again, dumb Marshall here, but I don't see how it can have a huge impact on flavor. What I've always thought, and when I really got into water chemistry myself, the reason that I was adjusting was was just to ensure that conversion, that starch to fermentable sugar conversion, was, I guess, peak. Done. I got the best I could get, and mash pH was one way to control for that.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. So controlling and getting the sugar content that I'm looking for to come out of the mash. That's what I've noticed the most. I'm sure there's a chemical reason that having or controlling pH or something being slightly too acidic or slightly too high or too basic actually results in some sort of flavor compound. And I'm sure if we got somebody on here, Oregon State or one of those fermentation science programs, that they could explain it to us. But for me, the home brewer, when I'm looking at this, what I'm trying to do again is just make sure that everything is consistent through the process. So making sure I'm hitting my numbers that I want to with my grains based on the process, and knowing that every time I brew, as long as nothing else changes, if I'm putting in and following a recipe once I've dialed my system in, that it's going to produce the sugar content. I'm going to hit my numbers. I'm going to have a consistent, repeatable product.
Yeah, I think that's key. That's kind of where my mind was as well. So there are, I guess, the two different situations that you have to kind of keep an eye on is a mash pH too low. Now, the only time in my in my brewing where I'm not adding crazy stuff, right? I'm just brewing normal beers. The only time where I've ever had to adjust my mash pH up is when I'm using a really big charge of roasted malt or roasted grains. So if I'm making a, let's say it's Irish stout or something like that, a dry stout, then I've had it come back where my pH, based on what Brew and Water is telling me, right, is going to be down in the 4.9 to 5.0 kind of area, and so you have to do something to bring it back up. If indeed what it is you want to do is to get closer to that 5.2. In those scenarios, I'm curious to know what you do. I started off using chalk, and I started reading that, and I don't know, I don't, this is back before I didn't measure. I admit my fault here. I didn't actually measure the mash pH when I was using chalk because I didn't have a meter. This was years and years ago. Then I read somewhere or heard somewhere that chalk doesn't actually dissolve, so it's not having the impact that it's supposed to be having. And so I moved to pickling lime, and that's what I've used since. And I have measured that, and it absolutely does work. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just use baking soda. I'd heard that same thing about chalk as well, and it seems like it kind of makes sense because I don't know if you've ever. I don't know if most of the listeners are probably old enough to remember actual chalkboards and having to dust off erasers. But if you got that crap on your hand, it didn't come off in water.
That's a good point.
And that's kind of how I looked at it. Like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So using chalk, but I just use baking soda because I just have it around the house.
Yeah, and when adjusting your mash pH up, because it's too low. Mm-hmm. If you're using baking soda, I've also used baking soda. One thing that they'll say you got to kind of pay mind to is the sodium levels in your water. So if you have a starting water that's basically devoid of sodium, and a lot of times it's pretty low. I think most of the water profiles that when people send them to me, their sodium levels are below about 10 ppm. So you don't have to worry too much because it doesn't take much baking soda to get your pH back up. So just something to keep your mind on when you are adjusting your pH up. Now, the real purpose of this show is talking about how to adjust that mash pH down, and I do believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kate. I think that's probably a more common issue at least among homebrewers, than having to adjust the pH up.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense if you think about it conceptually. If we're looking from even neutral water of 7.0 on the pH scale, and we're trying to get it down to 5.2, 5.6, we talk a little bit about how grains affect that in just a minute. But if you're trying to get it just conceptually from 7 down to 5.2 or 5.6, more often than not, we're going to be talking about reducing the pH down to a level. And especially if our tap water, like if you're brewing using tap water like me, or you're brewing using something that's much higher than 7, up in that 8 range, you're definitely going to need to do something to help it nudge down into that ideal enzymatic range.
Yeah. And I do think there's probably some subjective preference when it comes to quote unquote the most ideal mash pH. The range is actually fairly. That's 5.2 to 5.6 isn't a tiny range. That's actually pretty decently, I guess, vast. But I've heard a lot of people say that ideally you want 5.2. If you can nail 5.2 every time, you're golden. That's money. Interestingly, depending on back when I was making IPA that had a little bit of C6 60, typically, even without any acid adjustment, if I was measuring my mash pH, it would be right around 5.2 to 5.4. I mean, I was nailing it all the time. And I have to believe that a part of that was because that Crystal 60 was contributing just enough acidity to really to make up for what the pale malt may not have done on its own.
Yeah. I mean, same like we were talking about earlier with roasted grains. It's certainly possible that Crystal or roasted grains, when you use those, that it's reducing your pH down a little bit just because of the process for making those grains.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, then the darker the grain, I mean, that's pretty simple rule of thumb is the darker the grain or the more, the more roasted or kilned the grain is, the greater impact it's going to have on that pH, bringing it down a little bit. Maybe the easiest way to get into mash pH adjustment is to not even worry about actual acids and just buy a malt that's designed specifically for mash pH adjustment.
Yeah, so a acidulated malt, for those of you that haven't used it before, it derived, well, I say it should derive. The common wisdom is that the reason acidulated malt existed is because of Reinheitsgebot there in Germany that required that the only 4 ingredients or 3 ingredients that could be in beer were malt water and hops until yeast was later discovered. But the point there is adding something like lactic acid or phosphoric acid or some other non-water malt or hop ingredient violated the Reinheitsgebot, and therefore you couldn't sell your beer in Germany. So what did the Germans do whenever they needed to use or to reduce their water down to levels that were ideal for getting conversion? This is something that also makes sense to me from a conceptual standpoint. If you think about a brewer that's trying to use river water that's come down through the mountains and is now in the river and may have picked up a bunch of who knows what that's sort of harder than it would normally use. That's the water that you have access to, and you're trying to sell as much beer or get as much sugar content as you can out of the grains that you have. But your water's hard, or for whatever reason, something along the way, somebody figured out that if they did or created acidulated malt, meaning if they let the malt actually go for a long time or sit in the presence of additional bacteria, it would get this really sour, tart taste. Then they could add that to fermenting beer, and they would get a higher extract efficiency out of the beer. So it sort of makes sense to me from a conceptual standpoint. You've got this sort of old mash sitting around with who knows what else is in it. Yeah. It's tart, and it's created this malt that's more acidic than would be good to use. Throw that in there, and suddenly you're getting more efficiency. You're getting more sweet wort. You're getting and able to use that longer.
Yeah. I think it's genius. Now, I have heard, I don't mean to spread rumors, but I did hear that there are some maltsters who their acidulated malt is literally just Pilsner malt with lactic acid sprayed over it. So whatever, if that's the case, it makes sense to me. We live in modern times here, but now we're gonna hit on using actual acids to adjust mash pH. The two most common that I'm aware of, I know there are other ones, but the two most common are lactic acid, which that is the acid that is, I guess that's what's on acidulated malt. Maybe, naturally made versions of acidulated malt have other stuff as well. But lactic acid is what's on that. And it can come in different strengths. I don't know if there's any pros and cons that you've heard of about using lactic acid.
Yeah, for sure. So, first of all, so the way that lactic is created, so lactic is a natural process. So when cells are doing cellular respiration, the fermentation process, quote unquote, they're producing lactic acid as a result of that. So lactic acid exists in all beer, as long as that enzymatic activity is happening, and yeast are able to produce it, yeast are able to consume it, or other organisms that are happening in that mash, lactic acid can be produced. So it's naturally occurring. It exists just sort of out there. There are synthetic versions of lactic, but that's generally how it's produced. Some of the pros and cons are it comes in different strengths. For example, one that I commonly see at my homebrew shop is 88% lactic acid. So I can use a very small amount of lactic acid. For example, even in my hard water, 200 parts per million of bicarbonates, I can use 10 milliliters or less of lactic acid, depending on what other grains I'm using. I use 10 milliliters or less of that in a 10 gallons of water to get it down to my desired profile. So, I mean, that's a really, really tiny, really small amount, which is useful. There is some concern, at least common wisdom, that lactic acid, once you get over a certain threshold, that it creates a noticeable character in the beer that's an off flavor, which makes sense. If you've got too much lactic acid in the beer, something starts to taste tart or sour. Nobody wants to drink it. Off flavor in beer, right?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense to me. What I'm curious about is what is the quote unquote off flavor, because I do sour is more of like a perception. It's like, it's not necessarily a flavor in my mind, but is there a flavor associated with lactic acid? I've got my lactic acid bottle sitting right here. I just gave it an open and went to take a whiff, and it doesn't smell like anything. It smells like lactic acid, but that's just a concentrated kind of gummy solution, a somewhat viscous solution, I should say. But it doesn't. I don't have I can't put words to what that smell might translate over to in flavor, except for sour.
Some people would say like sour milk, if you've had milk sitting in the refrigerator for a while and you open it up and get that like sniff right off of it, that sort of sour, acidic taste.
Maybe yogurty or something like that, or
yeah, like yogurty. Yeah, that's a good way to say it. Depending on how the lactic acid was produced, you may actually get some sort of a buttery smell or flavor from lactic acid. At least I've heard that thrown around a lot. Anecdotally, I have noticed that in some forms of lactic acid that I've used. Open it up and it just smells like it's a tub of margarine.
That's so weird.
Yeah, which is totally weird. But lactic acid in the brewing process obviously shouldn't smell like that. It should smell like I mean, the closest corollary I can think of is sour milk.
Yeah.
But again, not terribly strong. It doesn't have a huge smell or flavor to it, but it does exist. Which, again, over a certain threshold, common wisdom is sour or tart.
Yeah.
And too much so.
Yeah. Now, the other popular acid that brewers are using I know there are a few more. We'll mention those, but the other really popular one is phosphoric acid.
Yeah, so phosphoric is one that I use a lot. I generally use either lactic or phosphoric. Phosphoric is nice because it comes in different quantities for me. So it comes in a 10% solution or an 85% solution. The similar benefit to using lactic is that an 85% solution you don't have to use as much actual solution on there. However, my understanding is if you've used phosphoric acid, it is sort of a gummier solution than the lactic acid. Yeah. So my homebrew store also offers it in a 10% solution, which makes it way easier to use and mix up and all that stuff. It's much more of a liquid, more similar to lactic acid in the way that it's used. I don't know for 100% certain how phosphoric acid is made. I've tried to look, and honestly, the chemistry is beyond me at this point.
I know. I'm just going to keep it a secret.
Great.
Right,
Thanks,
yeah,
Marshall.
I have no clue.
All right, it's a feedback, Marshall at brewlosophy.com. But phosphoric acid also does exist in beer as well. It's in beer just naturally. It's a natural acid that's produced, and so yet another way to reduce your pH in the beer. Again, hopefully without crossing any sort of flavor threshold that may result in an off flavor of a beer. One of the benefits that's commonly spouted with phosphoric acid is that because it exists in beer so much, it's much harder for people to pick out as sort of an off flavor. It doesn't create a tart or a sour off flavor. And even trying to smell a phosphoric acid, I think if you set phosphoric right next to acid or next to lactic's going to smell much stronger than the phosphoric, at least to me.
No, that's absolutely my experience as well. I started off with 10% phosphoric when I was just getting into water chem, and that it had no smell that I could remember, but I did have to use quite a bit. If I was going in with 100% Pilsner malt grist or something like that, something really, really pale. I was using upwards of 16 to 20 milliliters of phosphoric, and I was blowing through those bottles. So the strength of the solution is one reason that I ended up kind of favoring lactic acid. And I think a lot of people do that. Now, like you said, phosphoric is also available in different strengths. It just depends on where you're buying it, basically. I know a lot of people get their stuff, get their acids and whatnot from actual like science stores as opposed to homebrew shops, but you can find different strengths in homebrew shops. Now, just to mention them, I've heard from people who use citric acid for mash pH adjustment. I've never done that. The cons that I've heard is that it could impart a sort of citrusy kind of sourness to your beer or flavor. I've also heard of people using, I believe it's hydrochloric acid, really, really small amounts of it. I may be wrong about that. Then I've heard about people using malic acid, and then the weirdest one to me is acetic acid, which is vinegar. So some people are adjusting the pH of their water, which ultimately impacts their mash pH with vinegar as well. And all of those, they all basically function the same way, but they are made differently. They're produced from different processes, and they could potentially have a different impact on the ultimate character flavor of the beer. But who knows? I mean, if they would do that or not, who knows if phosphoric or lactic would produce different flavors. We did a couple experiments on just that. We're going to be getting to those results as soon as we're back from the short break. When dumping wort-soaked grain and leftover low-gravity wort while cleaning up after a brew day, did you ever wonder what your true efficiency would be if that wort made its way to the kettle instead? Using the brew bag, a fabric filter for all mash tuns and brewing methods, allows you to capture every last drop of wort. Not only does this increase kettle efficiency, it lowers your grain bill, which saves you money. Throwing wort in the trash is like dumping a 12-pack down the drain and just doesn't make sense. Use the brew bag and leave no wort behind. I've been using these filters for a long time and recommend them to everyone. I never have to worry about a stuck sparge, and cleanup is fast and easy. Go grab yourself a brew bag fabric filter at brewinabag.com and be sure to use code TBP17 at checkout to get a discount on your order. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer, and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. When I first started messing around with my water chemistry, I was met with options I didn't expect in regards to the best acid to use for mash pH adjustment. Like I said, I started off with 10% phosphoric, which given my tap water profile, often required me to use quite a bit to achieve the proper pH. So I switched to 88% lactic acid and did so without batting an eye. Then at some point, Malcolm mentioned something to me about his lactic acid having a peculiar smell that he felt may be contributing an odd flavor to his beer. So he ended up designing a really neat experiment to see for himself. Malcolm brewed up 2 5-gallon batches of Kolsch, one of your favorite styles there, Cade.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. And so the really simple recipe, 89% Pilsner malt, 11% wheat malt. He batch sparged. He adjusted his strike water. Both sets of strike water were, obviously, they were separate. He used 4.1 milliliters of 75% phosphoric acid. Now, I believe he got this from a brewing friend, a commercial brewer, because that's pretty strong phosphoric acid. So 4.1 milliliters of 75% phosphoric acid in one strike water. The other one got 4.5 milliliters of 88% lactic, only 0.4 milliliters difference to achieve the same exact mash pH, which I thought was pretty great. That way, it's not a matter of you actually added much more of one solution than the other. So good way to start this one off. The phosphoric acid mash hit a 5.40 pH, while the lactic acid mash hit 5.41. I'm going to call that the same. Let's see. He adjusted his sparge water to 6.0 pH using 2.4 milliliters of phosphoric and 2.7 milliliters of lactic. So those were identical as well in terms of the pH that he sparged with. Both batches were boiled for 70 minutes. He added Perlay, Hallertauer, and Perlay to the boil. Those are at different times, 70 minutes for the first dose, 10 minutes for the second dose, and with 1 minute left for that last dose of Perlay. The OGs were about the same. The phosphoric acid wort was at 1040, and the lactic acid wort was at 1041. Again, I don't know if that's because the lactic acid actually encouraged more conversion. I've never heard that it would do that. I don't know if you've heard anything about that, Cade, but
yeah, no, not sure. I mean, and one specific gravity point to me is, who knows? I mean, it could just be how it was floating in the the hydrometer measurement too.
Yeah,
for that.
Good call. So he split a starter of WLP 029, that's the Kolsch or German ale strain, from White Labs equally between both batches. The beers fermented for 3 days at 62 degrees Fahrenheit, that's 17 C, before he ramped the temp up to 68 degrees Fahrenheit or 20 C for a week-long diacetyl rest. And then both beers finished at the same 1008 FG. To me, what that says right off the bat is that the impact of at the very least, the objectively measurable impact of mash pH was pretty controlled. It was pretty identical between the two. So, as it regards conversion, it would appear that both phosphoric and lactic basically do the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, from a number standpoint on the homebrew scale, we got a similar, basically a similar pH, basically similar original gravity and exactly the same final gravity. 1 point off on specific gravity, 0.01 off on the pH.
Right.
I mean, that seems like as close as you can get with this variable, or at least close enough.
Yeah, absolutely. He cold crashed these beers, fined them both with gelatin, then he racked them to kegs a couple days later. The beers spent a week on gas, at which point they were clear, carbonated. They looked absolutely gorgeous to me, and they were ready to serve. Right off the bat, between the two, you look at the beers and the glasses side by side, they looked identical in every single respect. I'm not sure I would expect to see a difference anyways. Now, when it comes to Malcolm's ability, before we get to the experiment results, Malcolm did say that his first triangle test attempt, he failed. He wasn't able to get it right. But then as he went back and really started to focus and kind of hone in his palate, if you will, he was able to consistently tell the beers apart, but only after they warmed up a little bit, which is fine. That's not a bad way to evaluate them. And he said that they were definitely more alike than they were different, but he did feel like he picked something up out of them that was different. And at least it was different enough for him to be able to tell them apart. So he then takes these beers and serves 23 participants the triangle test, out of which 12 would need to identify the odd beer out in order for us to say that it was significant. And in the end, only 11 did. So not even half, 48% of the people happened to, guess, or maybe they did. But only 11 out of 23 chose the unique sample in the triangle test, which allows us to say that these beers were probably, at the very least, they were probably way more similar than they were different. Maybe a promising thing for users of both phosphoric and lactic acid who have been wondering if they should, switch to the other one.
Yeah, I mean, these results were really interesting to me. I mean, the statistical analysis would say, these tasters weren't able to reliably tell a difference, which was fascinating.
Yeah.
And sort of consistent with Malcolm's first taste. But then as he, sort of became more, I guess he would say, attuned to the flavor, he was able to more specifically identify it. Really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too. Malcolm also is one of our highest ranked, judges. He spent a lot of time evaluating beers, and he was incredibly biased. Now, that doesn't mean that there wasn't an actual difference and that he's Superman, but just that he, as focused as he was and as aware as he was of the variable, it could just be that the very subtle hint of that butter thing that he was picking up in his lactic acid, he was able to detect it, knowing that it was there. Now, he did not say that. That's not what he was saying. Gave it away for him. But that's kind of where I guess that's, what I'm presuming based on the blind taster results. Now, Cade, you as a Brew Club member, you kind of wanted to repeat this, but you did what I was after, especially after Malcolm's experiment, what I was most interested in is, well, if you take the standard 10% phosphoric and you have to use quite a bit more than 88% lactic acid, will that have an impact on the flavor profile of the beer?
Yeah, so this one was really fun for me to do. This was the first experiment that I ever did as part of the Brew Club, which was a lot of fun. And by the way, shout out to the Brew Club. If you guys want to get involved, just hit me up, shoot me an email, or check us out on Facebook. You can do repeat experiments or your own experiment just like this. Just reach out to us. Mike at the Brew Club, or Kate at the Brew Club, or Kate at brewlosophy.com. This one was a lot of fun because, I saw this water experiment with Malcolm, and I was thinking, man, my water's so hard. It's got all those, 195, 200 bicarbonates. And I kept getting this comment on my Kolsch's that I was trying to dial in, that there was this tang to one of them, or I think even one judge called it apple-like or something along those lines. I can't remember exactly, but I saw this and I perceived that as well in my Kolsch's, and so I thought, well, okay, maybe it is this lactic, sourness or tartness or whatever that's causing mine to be get this ding on whenever I send it in for competitions on my score sheets. So I wanted to retry this one, and exactly like you said, Marshall, I wanted to do it with using the 10% phosphoric with a huge addition. So my 10% phosphoric on my boil volume was over 100 milliliters. I think it was 108 milliliters is what I added in 10% phosphoric versus 10.4 milliliters of lactic. So just by comparison, though, also is Malcolm used 7.2 milliliters of 88% lactic acid. I used 10.4 milliliters of lactic acid. So that's almost 50% higher than what Malcolm used. So quite a bit harder water, quite a bit more lactic acid and phosphoric acid in that, which I also wanted to see if that would change anything in the way that it came out.
I mean, 108 milliliters, that's compared to 10.4. That's just wild to me. That was a lot. That's a lot of liquid that you're adding, just extra liquid that you're adding to your mash.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I had like an 8 fluid ounce bottle, and it was, I'm sure I could do the conversion from mLs to ounces, but it felt like it was a third to a half of a bottle of phosphoric. So I brewed this. I wanted to follow or make it as close as I could to Malcolm's recipe on my system, adjusting for efficiencies and that kind of stuff on my system. But doing it as close as I could to Malcolm's, and then running through the process the same way. So I added the adjustments, or added the lactic acid and phosphoric acid in the same way that Malcolm did. Went through, and my pH was 5.42 on the lactic and 5.43 on the phosphoric. So Malcolm's 5.40, mine 5.41, which was totally lucky. I had no idea how that happened, but great, right?
And brewing water, right? Or did you use the Beersmith water thing? Is pretty good too. It's been really accurate for me lately.
Yeah, no, this was Brew and Water. This was before the water profile thing came out with Beersmith. But yeah, this was incredibly accurate. I was really impressed with the Brew and Water adjustments for this reason. Same thing. Put it into my fermentation chamber, fermented for a couple of days, and then actually I think I fermented it a little bit different schedule for him. From him, started out, hit the OG of 1.049. Both batches were exactly the same, using refractometer readings, and let it ferment at 60 for 2 days, or for 14 days, 2 weeks, and let both beers reach that same FG that Malcolm hit, 1.008.
And so now you fermented this with the same yeast, WLP 029. Again, that's the PJ for us strain. It's the same as Dieter, I believe, or similar to at the very least. Do you typically ferment your Kolsch at 60F or 17C? Is that?
This was a little bit lower than I normally do. Usually I'm at like 62.
Okay.
F. I don't know what the Celsius conversion is.
About 18.
But that's yeah. Yeah. There you go. Yeah. So 2 degrees different. I'm not sure that it makes all that much of a difference, but that's usually where I'm at for Kolsch's.
So they did hit the same, everything about these beers at this point, with the exception of the difference, or the different type of acid, is all the objective stuff is completely the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, my OG was just a little bit higher, but not high enough that I think it would have made a huge difference in the way that it was in the tasting panel.
Well, right, but between the two beers that you brewed, everything was identical. They hit the same OG, they hit the same FG. You fermented them next to each other. Both got cold crashed and fined with biofine clear as opposed to gelatin before you kegged them, right?
Yep. I got the vegetarian wife, so
there you go.
Biofine clear it is at our household. Kegged them and they came out beautiful. Beautiful, nice, clear Kolsch's, and they tasted great too.
That's really what matters. Who cares about the data? That's what matters, is that they taste good. So you
yeah, I have no problem having 10 gallons of Kolsch on tap at any time.
So did they look the same? I mean, in the pictures that I saw, it looked like there was nothing different about them.
Yeah, no, totally looked the same. Crystal clear, same color, same head. Everything looked identical when pouring them into glasses.
So tell us, before we talk about the data, what your impressions of these beers were and your ability when you were doing your own totally unblind triangle tests.
My totally semi-unblind triangle tests. I was looking for that tart tang, right? Apple bitter ester tart tang. And I say that... Well, let me back up. I should say, whenever I test these beers, I always try to do it like I'm doing it at a competition or Cicerone tasting or any of that sort of stuff. I always want to take my mind off of it and just try to focus on different aspects of the beer. Look at the malt, look at the hops, see if there's any yeast character, see if there's any off flavors, that kind of stuff. Go through my process. So try to do that with this, but didn't get anywhere with that. Ultimately, they tasted the same to me whenever I did that process. But I then started looking let the bias kick in a little bit and start looking for the tart flavor or something like that. My wife and I took these these at the same time, and I got the first one right, although admittedly I guessed on that. But then I did I missed the second one. So out of 2 tests, I got one right, missed one. Wife missed them both. So we weren't really able to tell a difference in those 2 beers.
So then you go and serve these to, just like Malcolm, you served them to 23 different completely blind participants. Was it at a homebrew club meeting or would you serve these?
Yeah, this was at Austin Zealots meeting. Another shout out to Austin Zealots for helping out with experiments here in Austin.
So you 23 participants.
Yeah, had 23 participants, needed 12 to achieve statistical significance at PO5, and that's exactly what we got, was 12 tasters that were able to identify the odd beer out.
So, to me, these results, I remember when you were filtered through Mike, but the Brew Club, when I read these results, I'm sitting there scratching my head going, wait a minute, so he did basically everything the same. And then it occurred to me that the biggest difference was that you didn't use 75% phosphoric, you used the 10% phosphoric. And it makes, I guess, sense to me that when you are adding that much more extra stuff, that it may have, and subtle as it may be. I mean, you clearly said you couldn't tell these beers apart. They tasted identical to you, but still, 12 out of 23 tasters were able to identify the unique sample. I think that does say that perhaps, that idea that more, if you're adding more acid because the strength of that acid is lower, then maybe it will have a perceptible impact. Did you poll the participants on preference or anything?
Yeah, I did. And so that's what I was just about to say. I think that's perfect time to segue into that. Of the 12 participants, 9 of the tasters preferred the beer made with phosphoric, 1 with lactic, and 2 said that didn't report a preference or were unable to taste the difference.
So that's I so badly want to be able to ask you but you couldn't tell them apart. So you can't really speak to what it was that they liked about it, because you don't have that experience of actually identifying a difference between the two. But I'm so curious what made the phosphoric so much more preferable, at least on that kind of level, than the lactic one, when the phosphoric actually had significantly more acid in it,
Yeah, exactly. These results were fascinating to me. There's such a wide difference. 9 tasters out of 12.
Yeah.
That preferred the phosphoric acid beer. Bunch of theories about why that could be. Obviously have no idea which one's actually correct. I think, in the article I even said, I don't know what I don't know. So I don't know that I can come up with a satisfactory explanation for why that was. But I can say that in talking with the people, what they said was, oh, this is great. My wife had an amazing quote about the phosphoric. Eventually, once she wasn't able to tell it correctly at first, but as we let it sit for a little bit longer, she described one of the beers as having more upness.
Oh yeah.
and I'm like, what does that mean?
That's like when I was telling my friends that I think we just talked about this on a recent episode where I'll describe my experience of a flavor as being like a shape. So this one's kind of triangular, or this one's, I get a really nice kind of square, clean thing. It makes sense to me, and I'm sure uppy or whatever she said makes sense to her. So
yeah, upness, and
yeah.
So in a more sort of refined or nuanced way, or a beer related way, what the taster said is the phosphoric just had a little bit more back end flavor. That's what most of them said, which I thought was kind of interesting. Back end flavor. What do you mean? And most of them, there were varying things that they said. But I like the way that it's described. It just had an upness. It had a finish that tasted really good, whereas the lactic one just sort of seemed crisp and ended. Didn't have that nice. You do want a crisp finish, obviously, in a Kolsch, but it didn't have that nice sort of lingering bready malty. Vinous Kolsch flavor.
It's very interesting to me, and really, I guess almost makes me want to go back to messing around with 10% phosphoric again, because I haven't done that in a long time. But fantastic set of results from both of those experiments, both of which we got a lot of questions and comments on. I'm going to go through some of those real quick. Paul S. said, I've stopped using lactic myself as I found my beers with it to have an undesirable taste. Upon removing lactic, the undesirable taste went away. Maybe I'm just sensitive to it.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe some people are more sensitive to it. Maybe there's a blind spot in my tasting, and I'm not as sensitive to lactic, and that's why I can't figure it out. Maybe that's why Marshall can't smell anything whenever he smells the lactic. Who knows? It's certainly possible. And, I can't say that it's not supported by these results, right? I mean, 12 tasters were able to determine a difference. So it's possible that it was the lactic itself that caused the difference. It's possible that, like Marshall said, that there was so much of the phosphoric acid in there that there is some characteristic of the phosphoric.
Absolutely.
That plays. It's a really interesting observation. I think these two tests, these two experiments, Malcolm's results being different, not significant, my results being significant, is a good illustration of why we do this, right? It's not prescriptive advice.
That's
One
right.
experiment doesn't mean that you should change your brewing practices. It's
Right.
science. The more data points we have, the better we are and better we can understand science.
Yeah, the closer we get to some truth, I guess, with more.
Exactly.
So, and again, the purpose of replication. So our next comment comes from Steve Warner, who said, I've used acetic acid, there you go, for years, along with mineral adjustments. I'd love to see that thrown into the hat here. I've never had a complaint implying vinegar on finished beers. Again, acetic acid is vinegar. This is something that I don't see why I would ever want to use acetic acid when lactic and phosphoric are so cheap and tend to last long enough for me anyways. But it is something that I think would be interesting to maybe have, do an experiment with acetic versus phosphoric or lactic, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, vinegar in beer, that doesn't seem like a flavor that would go really well, but he says he's used it and hasn't had any problems with it. Maybe it's something we should look into and test. I'd also be interested to see, where you get it. Would you just use straight acetic acid or can I just pour distilled vinegar?
Yeah, like white distilled vinegar. That's what I was thinking. I mean, that's basically just straight acetic acid. I mean, diluted. But it's an interesting thing that I think we will end up exploring at some point when one of us gets brave enough to throw vinegar in our. That is the worst. They say some sour beers are perfectly appropriate to have an acetic character. I don't even like sour beers that taste acetic. It's just not. Ugh. I want it out of my beer. I love vinegar. Don't get me wrong. I do. I love fish and chips. You got to have malt vinegar. But yeah. So
yeah. No. I remember I left a beer sitting in my closet for at least 6 months at one point. And yeah, that beer, whenever it came out, it just smelled like vinegar, malt vinegar. And I was, no. Vinegar's not something I want in my beer.
Yeah. So, Steve, if you want to send us a beer to have reviewed by Jersey and Tim, I'd be happy to accept it.
Totally not a Coors Light.
All right. Next comment comes from Quentin Nelson. Says, in our advanced homebrewing class, water module, we mix 2 taste samples, a few ounces of distilled water acidified to a pH of 5.2 to 5.5 with each type of acid. Then you can clearly taste the difference. That's fascinating. He says, most people prefer the neutral taste of phosphoric, so that's what I use. That is really, that's something I've never considered doing, is that because I could easily acquire 10% phosphoric or whatever I need to, and mix it with water and then sample the water so that all of the beer flavor is out of the way and you just get a grasp of what those acids actually taste like when they're diluted. I think it's fascinating idea to do. And his comment on the neutral taste of phosphoric makes me wonder if that, neutrality is what allowed more of that beer or malt character that you said your wife described coming through in that sample. If that's what maybe allowed it to come through, because the lactic maybe subtly gets in the way of that, perhaps. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. It could be that. This also reminds me of one of the reasons why people say that lactic imparts over a certain taste threshold, that it contributes an off flavor to beer, is because some of the studies that have shown that straight up pour lactic acid into final beer and then measure based on the different concentrations of lactic when people are able to taste and what the threshold is.
Yeah.
I mean, this is something that I might actually try to see if I can figure out. I think I've got both lactic and phosphoric here, just see if I can actually taste a difference, and maybe then might be able to refine my own palate and be able to recognize that.
Yeah, I think let me know if you do it, and also please get your wife involved, because I want to hear how she describes those 2 beers.
Yeah. This water has upness.
Yeah, that's the upness I was talking to you about. The next comment comes from Malcolm's original article, and I'm going to say this wrong, but Ziganeri, I think, is the one who left it. I do an acid rest around 35C, which is 95F, for an hour until my 8.1 pH is down to 5.2 to 5.5. I've tried phosphoric acid, lactic acid, 5.2 pH stabilizer. That stuff doesn't work in my experience. And acid malt, but must say that my best tasting lagers and pilsners are brewed with old school acid rest.
Yeah, I've never brewed with an acid rest, and my understanding is with the modified grains that we're using today, modern grains that we have available to us these days, that an acid rest may or may not be useful in your brewing process. Marsha, have we done an experiment on acid rest? I feel like we have.
You know what? You are putting me on the spot, and I feel like we have as well. But I'm not. I don't remember. We've done a lot of different rests. I'll tell you that. And if we haven't done it, I promise it's on the list. Like you, I've never done an acid rest. I've never done in my own brewery a step mash. So an acid rest is way down the line, but I trust what you're saying, that it works and that it brings your pH down and that the beers taste better when you do it. I think it would be interesting to try this method out where the acid rest is held long enough to where that mash pH is all the way down to 5.2 to 5.5. My issue with this comment though is that I can't imagine any mash being anywhere near 8.1 pH as soon as those grains, are in contact with the water. That is going to pull your pH down rather quickly. So if your mash, if after you dough in, you're at 8.1 pH, that I don't know if that would ever happen unless you've got mash water as bleach.
I mean, what was your starting water that you put in that was up over, that the mash was there? We didn't talk about it much, but grains have a natural buffering capacity.
Oh yeah.
To bring the pH of water down so that the enzymes can work. So I'd be really interested to see what you were using, what grains you were using, and then what that initial pH of your water was when you started.
Yeah, I would too. All right, final comment, and this is just somebody looking for a bit of advice, so I figured I'd include it. He says, his name's Bill. He says, hi, I'm just starting to dive into water a little bit more. I wonder if there's a specific pH meter that you would recommend from your experience. I have used, my experience is decently broad when it comes to this. I've used 4 different types of pH meters. One of those little yellow ones you can get for about $15 on Amazon. I would recommend it if you only want to spend $15 and you're willing to replace it every 5 or 6 months. That's about as long as it lasted me before it just stopped working. And a lot of people say, well, you got to treat the sensor well, and all. I did all that. It just literally stopped working. So the next one that I used was an Milwaukee MW102, I believe is what it is. And it's the same thing as the 101. The 102 comes with a temperature probe. I'm not sure it's terribly necessary. They run about $130 or so, and they work fantastic. I had that one for about 3 or 4 years before I lent it to a friend and forgot to get it back from him. And then I picked up a ThermoWorks, their 8689, which is one of those stick. It's like a higher end stick pH meter, and that's the one I'm using today. It still works really well. And I've not had any issues. They have a replaceable, what are those things? The nodes or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, the probe what's it called? It has a specific name. Oh well.
Yeah. Oh well. Anyways, you can replace it on those. I haven't had to replace it yet, but I do take care of it. I keep it in the solution. It works fine. Again, I'm not measuring mash pH that often anymore, but when I do, or when I'm making like a kettle sour, that's what I'll use, and it works well. I do have some experience using the ThermoWorks 8100 as well. That's it's a little bit bigger and bulkier. It's got an attached probe and a base that's about the size of your phone. Different strokes for different folks. But what are you using, Cade?
Yeah, you've got way more experience than I do with pH meters. I guess I got lucky. I don't know. I used the pH meter that comes with the Lamont Brew Lab kit. I think it's made by Lamont. I don't know the exact model number or part, or if they're the ones that produce it, or if they just put it in the package with their brew kit. But that's the one I use. It seems to always get accurate readings. I've only had to replace the probe or node once over 3-4 years of use. And that was, I realized, just because I was storing it incorrectly.
Yeah.
But
find a good pH meter, and if you take care of it, buy all the solutions that you need to keep it calibrated. You got to do it. It's just a part of the process. And then get storage solution, and it'll last you a while. So those would be my recommendations. My favorite one is probably the ThermoWorks 8689, just because it's really convenient. There's no wires on it or anything like that. It's very similar to what you're using, Cade. But that pen style is kind of what I favor. these days. Cade, that is all the time we've got for this episode. I know there was something cool you were telling me about with the Brew Club member who also did really well in a competition recently.
Yeah, just a little competition, the National Homebrew Competition. I just wanted to give a shout out to Matt Barone from the Brew Club. Got second place in category 29 specialty beer for his, and I'm going to butcher this, a Kuyt beer, Kuyt beer. I have no idea what that style is, but it's a specialty beer. Congratulations to Matt Barone for getting a silver medal and taking home I think that's the Brew Club's first medal at National Homebrew Competition.
First medal this year. We did take home a few from last year as well. So the Brew Club members are doing pretty good on their competing, though. I think a lot of the members right now are focusing mostly on experimenting, learning more about brewing and having fun with the experimental side of things. All right, well, congratulations, Matt. That is really awesome. Don't forget that you can head over to brewlosophy.com to read up on the experiment discussed in this episode, as well as everything else we're up to. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.